My boss didn't even look up from his phone. "Your position is being eliminated," he said, his voice cold. "Security will escort you out." He had no idea he was talking to the man who owns 80% of the entire company. He thought he was firing a low-level analyst. He didn't know he was firing his boss. I signed the papers calmly and just said, "I want to do this right." He just scoffed. How dramatic. He had no idea how dramatic the next board meeting would be. This is a story about how I took back my father's legacy. What would you do if you held all the power? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And for more stories like this one, make sure you subscribe, like, and comment on our channel, Inspiration Seeker. Now, let's begin. To everyone at Innovate Tech Solutions, I was just James Miller, just another face in the sea of cubicles, tucked away in the legacy R&D department. I was the quiet guy, the systems analyst who kept his head down, turned in his reports on time, and usually ate lunch alone at his desk. I was reliable, I was diligent, and I was completely invisible. That was exactly how I wanted it. You see, Innovate Tech wasn't just a job for me. It was my father's life. He was a brilliant, eccentric founder who built this company from nothing but a dream in his Austin garage, pouring every ounce of his genius into its code. When he passed, he left it all to me, not just a company, but a controlling 80% stake, locked away in a blind trust. I was the ghost in the machine, the silent majority owner. But I couldn't lead a company I didn't understand. I couldn't honor his legacy from a sterile penthouse office, looking at spreadsheets. So I used my mother's maiden name, Miller, and I started at the bottom. I wanted to see the company my father built, not through the eyes of a CEO, but through his eyes. For 6 months, I watched. I saw the passion that still lived in the R&D department. The legacy team, as they called us. We were working on projects my father himself had sketched out years ago. But I also saw the shadow creeping in from the executive floor. That shadow had a name, Mark Donovan. Donovan was a slick, charismatic CEO my father had hired years ago, a man with a $1,000 suit and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was all metrics, all stock price, all bonus. He didn't care about the legacy. He cared about the bottom line. He'd walk the halls like he was a king, completely unaware that the real owner was a guy he'd just passed in the hall. He saw us in R&D not as a company's heart, but as a cost center. He had no idea. I was listening to every word. The email landed in everyone's inbox at 9 a.m. sharp. Mandatory all-hands meeting. A new vision for Innovate Tech. An hour later, we were all packed into the main atrium. Mark Donovan took the stage, his image projected onto a massive screen behind him. He flashed that $1 million smile. "Team," he started, his voice booming with false energy. "To win the future, we have to be lean. We have to be efficient." A slide popped up behind him. Strategic restructuring. My stomach tightened. I knew what that word meant. Donovan proceeded to lay out an aggressive plan to maximize short-term profits. He talked about synergy and optimizing workflows. And then he brought down the axe. As part of this new agile vision, he said, "We will be sunsetting the legacy R&D department, effective immediately." The air was sucked out of the room. My colleagues, men and women who had worked with my father, looked around in quiet panic. This wasn't just a department. It was the soul of the company. Donovan asked if there were any questions, clearly not expecting any. I raised my hand. He sighed, annoyed by the interruption. "Yes, James, is it?" "It is," I said, standing up. My voice was calm, steady. "Mark, I've reviewed the data on Project Aegis, which this department is handling. It's on track to provide a 40% reduction in long-term security overhead. The projections show that cutting this department will actually cost the company more than it saves within 3 quarters. It's vital for our long-term stability." I spoke in a language he claimed to understand. Data and profit. Donovan's smile vanished. He clearly wasn't expecting an analyst to have that data. For a second, he looked flustered, but he recovered quickly, shifting to public ridicule. He let out a small, condescending laugh. "James," he said, "I appreciate the effort, but this is the big leagues. We'll leave the high-level strategy to the executives. He turned to the rest of the room. We can't get bogged down in the details. A simple coder just doesn't see the big picture. He dismissed me with a wave of his hand. I sat down, my face impassive. But inside, the decision was made. He hadn't just insulted me. He had declared war on my father's legacy. I didn't even make it back to my cubicle. My desk phone was ringing by the time I stepped off the elevator. It was Donovan's executive assistant. Her voice was clipped. "Mr. Donovan wants to see you. Penthouse office. Now." He was angry. Good. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent. His office was exactly what you'd expect. A sterile, cold expanse of glass and steel overlooking the Austin skyline. The desk was a slab of polished marble that could land a small helicopter. It was a room designed to make you feel small. It was a monument to his ego, not to my father's company. He was standing by the window when I entered, his back to me. He didn't turn around. I just stood there, waiting in the silence. Finally, he turned, but his eyes were already glued to the glowing screen in his hand. "James," he said, walking to his throne-like chair. He sat, still scrolling. "That little performance in the meeting? Unacceptable. It shows you're not aligned with the new vision. You're not a team player." I said nothing. I just watched him. He was a man who couldn't bear to be questioned, especially by someone he considered a nobody. He finally put his phone face down on the desk, but only to pick up a pre-prepared folder. He slid it across the vast desk. It stopped inches from my hand. "Your position is being eliminated," he said, his voice flat, bored. "It's a matter of efficiency." He'd already dismissed me in his mind. He picked his phone right back up, his thumb resuming its endless scrolling. "Security will escort you out." This was it, the final, arrogant mistake. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't ask why. I simply opened the folder, pulled the severance papers from inside, and found the signature line. I pulled my own pen from my shirt pocket. He glanced up, surprised by my lack of protest. I signed my name, James Miller, with a steady, even hand. I pushed the papers back toward him. "I want to do this right," I said, my voice perfectly calm. He stared at me for a beat. He'd been expecting a scene, a plea. My composure unnerved him, and he mistook it for weakness. He let out a short, sharp laugh. A scoff. "How dramatic," he sneered. "Just go." He pressed a button on his desk intercom. "Send security to my office. Mr. Miller is leaving." I turned, not giving him a backward glance, and walked to the door. He was already back on his phone, probably texting about his lunch reservation. He didn't even watch me go. 2 security guards met me at the elevator. They were big men, uncomfortable in their ill-fitting suits, and they looked at me with a sort of practiced pity. "Sir, if you'll come with us." They walked me back to my desk in the R&D department. The entire floor was silent, a graveyard of half-finished projects. My colleagues, my friends, watched from their cubicles, their faces a mixture of fear and sympathy. They saw me as the first casualty, the example. If Donovan could fire me so brazenly for speaking up, what chance did any of them have? I packed my few personal items, a photo of my father, a well-used coffee mug, a few notebooks, into a small cardboard box. The walk of shame. That's what Donovan wanted. He wanted me paraded through the office as a warning. The guards escorted me all the way to the front lobby, one on each side, as if I were a common criminal. They handed me my box and pointed to the glass doors. "Have a good day, sir." I pushed through the doors into the bright Texas sun. I took a breath. The performance was over. I didn't walk to the bus stop or to the employee parking garage where my modest sedan was parked. Instead, I walked the black executive car, a tinted window Audi, idling at the curb half a block away. The driver saw me, got out, and opened the back door. I placed the box on the seat and slid in. I pulled out my real phone, the one Donovan didn't know existed. I had one call to make. It rang twice. "Eleanor," I said. "Eleanor Vance, our CFO. She was my father's most trusted advisor, the company's moral compass, and the only person on this planet who knew that James Miller was actually James Anderson. She had been my eyes and ears on the executive floor. He did it." I said, my voice no longer the quiet analyst, But the man who owned the building I had just been thrown out of, he fired me. Her voice was grim, prepared. I was afraid of that. Are you okay? I'm fine, Eleanor. It just confirmed everything. It's time. Call the emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. There was a pause. I could hear her tapping on a keyboard. The audit is ready, James, she said, her voice dropping lower. I just got the final report from the forensic team. And it's worse than we thought. Much worse. I looked back at the glass tower of Innovatech, watching Donovan's office on the top floor. Good, I said. He just handed us a rope. I spent that evening with Eleanor and the legal team, lining up every document, every email, every wire transfer. We were building a fortress, and by midnight, it was impenetrable. Meanwhile, I could only imagine the scene in Donovan's office. He was probably pouring himself a glass of expensive scotch, celebrating his decisive action. He'd just made an example of that analyst. James Miller. He'd shown the company who was in charge. He was untouchable. And then at 4:30 p.m., an automated alert hit his calendar, and his assistants, and every minority board members. Subject: mandatory emergency board meeting, 9 a.m. His first reaction was probably irritation. Who had the authority to call a meeting without his approval? He looked closer. Summoned by the Anderson Family Trust. That's when the ice in his scotch would have stopped rattling. The trust, the 80% majority stakeholder, the massive, silent giant that had never, ever intervened. In all the years Donovan had been CEO, they had been a ghost, a signature on a proxy vote, nothing more. As long as the stock price was high, they were content. Suddenly, they weren't. I can just picture him, his arrogance instantly evaporating, replaced by a cold, prickling sweat. Why now? He'd start pacing his glass office, his mind racing. Did that analyst, Miller? No, impossible. He's a nobody. He would have scrambled, calling the trust's legal representatives at their Houston law firm, demanding to know what this was about. And he would have been met with a polite, ironclad wall. The representative will be present at the meeting, Mr. Donovan. We have no further comment at this time. He would have tried to charm. He would have tried to bully. Nothing. Panic would set in. He'd try to find out who the representative was. But the trust was blind. The beneficiary's name was sealed. He would spend the entire night rehearsing. He'd assume they were questioning his restructuring plan. He'd prepare presentations, charts, and justifications. He'd get ready to defend his profit-first strategy to spin the R&D cuts as a masterstroke of efficiency. He was preparing for a business argument. He had absolutely no idea he was preparing for his own execution. The next morning, the 40th floor boardroom was suffocatingly quiet. You could smell the tension, stale coffee, and the expensive polish on the 20-foot mahogany table. The minority board members, the other 20%, were all there. They were venture capitalists and old money investors, men and women who had been perfectly happy to let Donovan play king as long as the dividend checks cleared. Now, they sat in their high-backed leather chairs, whispering to each other, shooting nervous glances at the door. An emergency summons from the 80% stakeholder was, for them, an apocalypse. And at the head of the table stood Mark Donovan. He was trying to project command, pacing back and forth in front of the giant projector screen. He had his presentation loaded, a dozen slides full of charts and buzzwords to justify his restructuring. He'd been rehearsing all night, preparing to defend his strategy. He kept adjusting his silk tie, his knuckles white as he gripped his laser pointer. He was a man preparing for a business argument, completely unaware he was about to face a tribunal. The clock on the wall, a minimalist slab of brushed steel, clicked to 9:01 a.m. As if on cue, the heavy double doors at the far end of the room swung open. Every head turned. I walked in. I wasn't James Miller, the quiet analyst. The faded polo shirt and worn-out sneakers were gone. In their place was a dark charcoal suit, tailored perfectly, and hard-soled leather shoes that echoed on the marble floor. I wasn't a man who hunched over a keyboard. I stood tall. Beside me was Eleanor Vance, the CFO, her face a mask of calm professionalism, clutching a set of thick, hardbound audit reports. Flanking us was my legal team, led by Mr. Hayes, the Trust Senior Counsel. Donovan looked up, his rehearsed greeting dying on his lips. His mind just stalled, unable to process the scene. He saw me, the coder he had personally fired less than 24 hours ago. He saw the suit. He saw the CFO. He saw the sharks from the Houston law firm. It didn't compute. His face went from a waxy pale to a blotchy, furious red. He sputtered, pointing a shaking finger. "Miller? What in the hell are you doing here? I fired you." He snapped his head toward the door, bellowing at his assistant. "Security! Get him out of my boardroom. Now!" Donovan's voice was still echoing in the room. "Security! Get him out." The same two guards who had escorted me out yesterday appeared in the doorway. Their faces masked the confusion. They looked at me, then at Donovan, then at the silent, watching board members. They had no idea what to do. Before they could take a step, my lead lawyer, Mr. Hayes, stepped forward. His voice was not loud, but it had a weight that cut through the hysteria. "That will not be necessary, gentlemen. You may wait outside." The guards, sensing the shift in power, immediately stepped back and closed the doors. Hayes turned his attention to Donovan, who was still sputtering, his face a blotchy red. "Mr. Donovan, please be seated." It was not a request. It was a command. Donovan, stunned by the lawyer's authority, actually faltered. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "This meeting," Mr. Hayes continued, gesturing to me, "was called by my client." I looked down the long, polished table at every shocked face. Then I looked at Mark Donovan. I started to walk. I didn't stop at an empty chair on the side. I walked all the way to the head of the table, to the empty chair Donovan had been standing in front of. I stopped, standing right in front of him. "You're right, Mark," I said, my voice quiet, but it carried in the dead silent room. "You did fire James Miller, the analyst, yesterday. You made your reasons very clear. I let that hang in the air for a beat. But you're not speaking to James Miller anymore." I placed my leather portfolio on the table and clicked it open. I slid a single, thick document stack onto projector. The title page lit up the giant screen, the Anderson Family Trust, Ownership Charter. "My name," I said, finally looking him directly in the eyes, "is James Anderson." A gasp came from one of the board members. Donovan's face went from red to a sickly, waxy white. He looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. "My father's trust, which I now control, holds an 80% majority stake in Innovatech." I tapped the screen. "That means I control 80% of this company. I am the majority owner. And this," I said, gesturing to the silent board, "is my boardroom." The silence was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Donovan just stared, his mind finally, painfully, connecting the dots. The analyst, the R&D department, the dramatic exit. It was all clicking into place. I pulled out the heavy, high-back chair, his chair, and sat down. For the first time, I felt the proper weight of it. "Now," I said, addressing the room, "let's begin the meeting." I let the weight of that title, my title, settle into the room. Donovan had slumped into the chair I had just claimed, his body devoid of all its former swagger. He looked small. I turned my gaze from him and addressed the stunned minority board members. "I've spent the last 6 months," I began, my voice clear and cold, "working in the legacy R&D department, my father's department. I didn't come in as an analyst to play games. I came in because I wanted to see his legacy, the one you were all entrusted to protect. I wanted to see it from the ground up." My eyes locked back onto Donovan. His were fixed on the mahogany table. "Instead," I said, "I saw you. I saw a man gutting this company from the inside out. I saw you treating my father's life's work like a personal piggy bank you were desperate to crack open before anyone noticed." I leaned forward slightly, but I didn't just see it. I had it investigated. On cue, Eleanor Van stood up. She wasn't smiling. She was the very image of cold, forensic professionalism. She didn't use a projector. Instead, she walked the length of the table, placing a thick, hardbound audit report in front of each board member. A final copy was dropped in front of Donovan. It landed with a heavy final thud. For the past 8 weeks, Eleanor announced, at the express request of the Anderson Family Trust, my team has been conducting a full, independent forensic audit of all executive expenditures. She returned to her spot, standing next to me. Mr. Donovan, she said, you've been very, very busy. Does the name Apex Strategic Solutions mean anything to you? A consulting firm registered in Delaware. Donovan's head snapped up. His face was no longer pale. It was ashen. He was a trapped animal. Eleanor continued, Apex was registered 18 months ago. Its only client is Innovatech, and its sole proprietor, funneled through 2 blind LLCs, is you, Mark. A board member gasped. In that time, Eleanor said, you have personally approved $15.2 million in strategic consulting fees to the Shell Corporation for services that were never rendered. You've been siphoning millions directly from this company's accounts into your own. That's why you were so desperate to restructure, isn't it, Mark? I said, taking over. The audit was getting close. The R&D department, the legacy employees, the ones who knew my father's real business, they were the ones who would have noticed. They were a threat. I stood up, walking to stand directly over him. This wasn't about efficiency. It was a cover-up, a final cash grab. Fire the old guard, sell off the valuable R&D patents to a competitor for a personal kickback, and get out. You weren't just firing a department, Mark. You were burying the evidence. Donovan was shaking. He wasn't just beaten, he was exposed. The entire boardroom, the investors he'd spent years charming, stared at him with undisguised contempt. He opened his mouth, but only a dry, rasping sound came out. It was a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I repeated. $15 million is not a misunderstanding, Mark. It's theft. Wire fraud, to be specific. I walked back to the head of the table and stood there, looking down at the man who, just yesterday, couldn't be bothered to look up from his phone. The board, I said, my voice resonating in the quiet room, which, let's be clear, is me, has reviewed your performance. I let that hang in the air, letting him feel the full weight of his new reality. I leaned on my hands, looking directly into his terrified eyes. Mark, your position is being eliminated. I delivered the words with the same cold, flat finality he had used on me, but I added one more thing. It's a matter of efficiency. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with the shock of hearing his own weaponized words turned against him. This wasn't a business decision. It was a sentence. But there's a difference between you and me, Mark. I said, my voice dropping. When I fire someone, when I end their career, I'll look you in the eye when I do it. I didn't break his gaze. I let him see the cold, controlled anger he had mistaken for weakness. He was the one who was weak. He was the one who couldn't face his own actions. I pressed the intercom button on the desk console, the one he had used on me. Gentlemen, you can come in now. The boardroom doors opened. The very same 2 security guards from yesterday stepped inside. They looked at Donovan, then at me, standing at the head of the table. This time, there was no confusion in their eyes. They knew exactly who was in charge. Donovan started to stammer. No. Please, James, we can fix this. I can pay it back. You can't pay back my father's legacy, Mark, I said. And you're right. You will do this right. I nodded to the guards. Security will escort you out. As they moved in and each took one of his arms, he finally broke, trying to scramble out of his chair. You can't do this to me. I built this. You built nothing, I said. You just leached off a better man's work. I had one last piece of information for him. Oh, and Mark, don't bother calling your lawyer. The Austin Police Department is waiting for you in the lobby. They have some questions about the wire fraud. His face, if possible, went even whiter. The fight drained out of him. It was no longer a firing. It was an arrest. I watched them drag him out. No longer a king in his castle, just a common thief in $1,000 suit. And as the boardroom doors clicked shut, the silence he left behind felt like the first clean breath the company had taken in years. When the boardroom doors finally clicked shut, the silence Donovan left behind was heavy. It was absolute. I turned back to the long mahogany table. The minority board members, the other 20%, just sat there, frozen. They were silent partners, investors who had been perfectly content to be asleep at the wheel while Donovan drove the company off a cliff, just as long as the dividend checks kept coming. Now they were wide awake. They stared at me, their faces a mixture of shock and, for the first time, respect. I walked back to the head of the table, the seat of power that was now truly mine. "Gentlemen, ma'am," I said, my voice calm, "what you just witnessed was not a corporate takeover. It was a course correction, a cancer being cut out before it could kill the host." I let my gaze sweep over each of them. For years, this board has prioritized short-term stock gains over long-term vision. My father's vision. That era is over. I didn't need their vote. I was the vote. As of this moment, I am stepping in as active chairman and CEO of Innovatech Solutions. This is no longer a passive investment for me. This is my father's house, and I'm cleaning it. I picked up the desk phone, the one Donovan had used to fire me. I dialed Eleanor's extension. "Eleanor," I said, "my first official act. The strategic restructuring plan is terminated, effective immediately. I want you to reverse every single layoff. Every employee from the legacy R&D department is to be reinstated, with full back pay for the time they were unjustly terminated." I could hear the smile in her voice. "With pleasure, James." "One more thing," I said. "I need a new head of R&D, someone who actually understands the work. Send a promotion offer to David Chun. He's a new vice president of the department." I remembered David, the brilliant, passionate senior engineer who had defended our projects, the one who looked the most devastated when the cuts were announced. I hung up and looked at the board. The soul of this company was never in this boardroom. It was on the R&D floor. It's time we started acting like it. I looked out the great glass window at the same Austin skyline Donovan had claimed as his own. But I wasn't just looking at the view. I was looking at the reflection of the company I had just reclaimed. The work wasn't over. It was just beginning.